University of Missouri Extension Forage Livestock Town Hall. This is a weekly program that we offer on Thursdays from noon till about 1 o'clock. We try to feature topics of interest that are timely. And we also feature a weather report each week. With me today, I'm serving as host. I'm a field specialist in agronomy in the east central part of Missouri. My co-host is Patrick Davis. And Patrick is a field specialist in livestock in the western side of the state. You may find that you may have questions as we work our ways through the town hall, and we certainly encourage those questions. We want you to ask questions. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a chat button, a chat feature. If you click on that in the drop-down menu, you can type the question in directly, and everyone on the call will see your question. Or if you like, Patrick has changed his name to ask questions here, and you can choose that and send a question directly to Patrick, and only he will see that question. You can forward that on to me for to ask the presenter directly. So we certainly want to encourage you to ask questions, and that's getting your questions answered is a big part of what we're about with these town halls. Today, we'll start with a weather update from Dr. Pat Guinan. And then our featured topic, educational topic today is ergot potential in grass pastures. Dr. Craig Roberts and Dr. Tim Evans will be providing that program today. Start off with our weather report, and Pat, if you're ready.
I am. Thank you, Matt, and good afternoon, everyone. I'll get right into it. On the left, summer is here. Things have warmed up, and these are precip totals for the first 10 days of June across the middle part of the country. And, it's getting a little dry here. I know we were very wet in May, but things are starting to dry up a little bit with the warmer temps. And you can see generally, with the exception of far southeast Missouri, and even they've had some decent rain in far southeast Missouri, it's actually still pretty wet around the Boot Hill area and parts of southeast Missouri. But as you go north and westward, things get a lot more scattered, localized heavy rain events, but more people missing out than receiving the big rains over the first 10 days of June. These white areas you see here, nothing. Not a drop of rain has fallen for the first 10 days of June. And, it's not a good situation. Look on the right. Things are deteriorating across the northern plains, the upper Midwest, full-blown drought conditions. And these are showing, this is the map that just came out this morning, showing these deteriorating conditions in a good portion of the Corn Belt, generally the northwestern half of the Corn Belt. They're in some sort of abnormal dryness to drought conditions, even severe drought in parts of South Dakota and Northwest Iowa. So really you need to keep an eye on this. It's only June, and we got to get through July and August. Not a good situation, especially up in the Dakotas where they have an extreme and exceptional drought situation ongoing. So we're seeing a lot of impacts, and hopefully we'll see a pattern change. But unfortunately, you'll see in the extended outlook that it looks like more heat and below normal precip is in the forecast. Soil temperatures, they've rebounded really well with these warm conditions. They warmed up about 10 degrees compared to last week. On the left, these are the average 2-inch soil temperatures. They're running middle to upper 70s across much of the state. A little bit more cloudy conditions, more showery weather across southern Missouri, southeast Missouri. So they're actually a little bit cooler. In the middle, you can see the red line shows the trend over the past couple of weeks. We're actually near average compared to this blue line, which is the long-term average for soil temps. And then on the right, you can see as of this morning, about 9:40 this morning, they were generally running in the mid to upper 70s, even some low 80s in some parts of the state. I think the big weather story for the next couple of days and then through the weekend is this heat and humidity. These are some of the highest heat indices we're going to see for the year so far. Here on the left, you can see they've already issued heat advisories here in much of the hotter, drier areas of the northern plains into Minnesota, and starting to show some extreme heat indices, perhaps across Oklahoma into Texas. I wouldn't be surprised by tomorrow, perhaps to see some more filling in the gap here, parts of Missouri that could be under heat advisories. Obviously, with these high temperatures in the 90s and dew points in the 60s and low 70s, that creates some very uncomfortable conditions. So please be aware, stay hydrated, wear light colored clothing, and be sure to take breaks in this outdoor heat and humidity. It can be a deadly combination, and we need to pay close attention to that as we go into the today, tomorrow, and into the weekend. You can see what those forecasted heat indices are like today and tomorrow in low to upper 90s by Saturday or by Friday, and by Saturday, perhaps making 100 degrees. Hopefully there is a chance of some showers and thunderstorms. And, I talked about the drought that's impacting the upper Midwest and the northern plains. There are indications there is a low pressure system in southern Canada. There's a cold front that extends south from that. This image you see in the lower left is the thunderstorm outlook over the next 24 hours. They are anticipating an outbreak of some widespread and perhaps severe thunderstorms across the northern plains. And so even though, you don't like to see severe weather, they really need the rain. So anything is welcome in any shape or form. But they are anticipating a widespread area of showers and thunderstorms to fire up later this afternoon and tonight. And the map here shows the forecast of precipitation, not an excessive amount, but nonetheless anywhere from a quarter to a half inch, even an inch or so, perhaps across parts of the Dakotas. It's interesting to note they are forecasting these storms to fire up again later today and tonight, and perhaps impacting northwest Missouri by tomorrow afternoon. There are indications that a couple computer forecast models are indicating these storms, when they do fire up, that we'll have a very unstable air mass here in Missouri. And as we go through the afternoon tomorrow, these storms could impact northwest Missouri and hopefully impacting other parts of the state that could actually stand to use a little bit of rain as we go into tomorrow night and Saturday morning. So something to keep an eye on. Again, these numbers take with a grain of salt. It's really hard to forecast amounts, let alone where it's going to occur here as we go into the summer. But it does look like something's going to happen, and perhaps Missouri could get some rainfall as we go into tomorrow and on into Saturday. This is what's a little bit more concerning is this forecast for next week, especially in drought affected areas of much of the western part of the country. We have that system perhaps impacting with some rainfall across the northern plains today and tomorrow, but they're forecasting that ridge of high pressure, which has been over the area for several weeks now, to rebuild and intensify across the western US, and that is a high likelihood of above normal temperatures then to return back by next week and persist. At the same time, as you go east, they're forecasting more of an area of a cooler air mass impacting the eastern parts. And you can see Missouri is right in the middle there. We actually could see some more seasonable, pleasant temperatures as we get into midweek, mid to late week. That would put highs in generally maybe the low to mid 80s. But as you go north and westward, you get under the influence of that ridge of high pressure. And we're going to see more triple digit heat, unfortunately, across this area. On the right, not a good picture. They are indicating all those browns below normal precip. Of course, they need it badly in the upper Midwest and the northern plains, and it just doesn't look like it's going to happen. And so, again, hopefully we'll see some precip that they're forecasting later today and tonight, because it looks like starting next week, things are going to get hot and dry again. So looking a little bit better here in Missouri, but of course, it only takes a couple weeks of dryness, especially as you go into the summertime where we start seeing some drier conditions, and we could always stand to use a little bit more rain. So Matt, that's pretty much a weather report. I'll hand it back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Patrick, any questions for Dr. Guinan?
I haven't seen any. No.
We'll move on into our educational topic for today, and the topic is Ergot potential in grass pastures. And with us is Dr. Craig Roberts. Dr. Roberts is a professor in plant science at the University of Missouri. He also serves as an educational director with MU Extension. We also have Dr. Tim Evans, who's an associate professor in veterinary pathobiology. So Drs. Roberts and Evans, I will turn this over to you.
Okay, thank you. Making sure we looking at the right screen. It's just a title slide here. Hoping it is. Yeah, the topic assigned to us today is ergot poisoning. We're starting to get reports on early signs of ergot poisoning in our state. Was it Tuesday morning, Monday or Tuesday morning? I started getting some phone calls from some of our livestock specialists who are reporting honeydew in some of the grass seed heads, and we'll talk about what that means. Ultimately, it means ergot poisoning. So what is ergot poisoning? You know, it's probably best to answer the question first, what is ergot? And we'll use this as a working definition, that ergot is a toxic fungus that infects the surface of grasses, especially the grass seed heads. And this differs from what we think of as an endophyte, a fungal endophyte, as we would have in ryegrass and in tall fescue, because endophytes infect the inside of the plant. So the ergot fungi infect the outside of the plant, the seed heads. And this is a typical drawing or artwork that shows what's called sclerotia, with some sexual bodies protruding. This actually on my screen, it's about 5 times too big, but these are very noticeable. This isn't a microscopic fungus that we can't detect unless we have some kind of special equipment, which is the case with endophytes. This is something that we can see. We need to talk just a little bit about the ergot life cycle, and we're going to get in and out of this in a hurry as quickly as we can. And if you look at this, really what we want to do, we want to look at this part right here. We have some spores, and they come along here, and they infect this grass seed head. And that's any grass seed head that's flowering this time of year. And when it does, we'll start seeing these clear syrupy bubbles that form on the outside of the seed head. That's called honeydew. And that's what our livestock specialists are reporting now, honeydew in the grass seed heads. The reason that's a concern is that honeydew contains a lot of spores, and they reinfect that seed head, and then we get these long protrusions we call sclerotia. They look like mouse droppings coming right out of the seed head. Now, the reason for showing the life cycle is those drop to the soil, and they're in the soil, and it starts all over again. And so it is a life cycle that's within that field. If we go on, we can see some pictures here of honeydew. This looks like it's in it's maybe rye, but this little syrupy exudate, as we call it, the syrupy mass that comes out of the seed head right here, will eventually turn into these hard-bodied sclerotia. And when people talk about ergot poisoning, they're really talking about this. But we've already got the indications we're going to have this. It's most common in the cereal grasses, which is ironic because those are the highly nutritional grasses, but barley, wheat, and rye, to some extent oats. Let's talk a little bit about ergot in forages and feeds. This is a table that lists ergot contamination that's common in cereal grains. And probably we could think this is in order of importance or in order of frequency. Rye is the one that we hear the most about historically and even now. But triticale, wheat, barley, and to some extent oats. We don't hear it as much in oats, but it could be in oats if it's the right time of year. Cereal grain screenings, in fact, all grass screenings, not just cereal grasses. And we have some folks who can tell some horror stories about feeding grass, some seed screenings that had ergot. And then all of these other milling products. These all can contain ergot. Here's an example of a small grain with ergot bodies. Now, when we see ergot infection, ergot contamination at this level, we know we're going to lose animals. This is no longer a matter of poor weight gain, poor milk production. We'll lose animals. Ergot in our forages, here it is in smooth brome grass. We see a little ergot body. It basically replaces the ovary and grows in its place. Here's ergot in tall fescue. This happens to be Tim Evans, who's on the call with us today, and will be making comments along the way. Ergot bodies, and this was in Colombia. Orchard grass, see the ergot protruding here, the ergot body, sclerotia coming right out of the seed head. Western wheatgrass, pearl millet. Here's a case of honeydew, and an extreme example of ergot bodies filling a pearl millet seed head. Now, it's not the ergot per se. It's not the mycelia, just like in the case of tall fescue. It's not the endophyte that's necessarily toxic. We have non-toxic strains, but all of the common strains of ergot that we happen to have, of the what's called claviceps, all of the common strains out in the wild, out in nature, produce these compounds, ergot alkaloids. We'll come back to that, but for right now, and this is a big mess. We don't have to be tested on this hopefully later, but right now the only thing to say is these are common to these are the common compounds that we find in fescue. They're just at high levels, and there are many more of them. Let's talk a little bit about symptoms of ergot poisoning. Ergot poisoning, we talk about it, of course, because this is a Forage Livestock town hall, but ergot poisoning became well known in the Dark Ages because of its toxicity to humans. People would be harvesting rye, then making bread with that rye, not knowing that those little dark, look like mouse droppings in there, were highly toxic organisms producing these ergot alkaloids. And what happened in those cases was people would lose their limbs, their hands and their feet, fingers, and so on, because of vasoconstriction. Here's some examples. This still goes on today in developing countries where people consume ergot. They have vasoconstriction, just like we have in tall fescue. That is, the blood vessels narrow. And when the blood vessels narrow, the blood doesn't reach the extremities, and those extremities die off and slough off. And so this is common in developing countries. You'll find ergot poisoning and ergotism and ergot-based lameness in humans throughout the literature and the art of the Middle Ages. In fact, there was a Catholic saint, I can't remember, Saint Anthony, who became the saint to, I guess, to call on if you had ergot poisoning. And you can see here he is, and above him are hands and feet that have sloughed off. Let's come back to the ergot alkaloids. The ergot alkaloids, without spending a lot of time on this, what we would say here is the ergot alkaloids are very similar to the alkaloids that we see in fescue toxicosis. Here we have ergovaline. Now, ergovaline is the most reported alkaloid in tall fescue toxicosis, but there are 5 additional alkaloids produced by claviceps, or by the main species that we talk about in ergot. So ergot will produce, yes, many more alkaloids and much higher concentrations. And it's not surprising, we'll see the same symptoms. So that means we'll see all of the health problems with vasoconstriction, immunosuppression, poor thermal regulation, and then also all of the production problems, low rate of gain and low milk production and low reproduction. We were just talking about this at one of our meetings in St. Thomas a couple of days ago, and what we say in the case of toxic tall fescue, Kentucky 31, is everything that we would like to see in performance, we don't see. That is daily gain, weaning weight, no good milk production, good calving rate, reproduction. All those things we want to see, we don't see. And all the things we don't want to see, we do see. Lameness, poor performance, poor reproduction. Well, it's far, far, far worse in the case of ergot poisoning. And now the reason for pointing all this out is we're going to see this in Missouri in the next few weeks. We will see it. So we'll start getting phone calls. I'll get some in my office, and our people at the university will start getting these calls. And people will say, I've got fescue foot. I've got fescue poisoning. And it's just severe. It's just severe symptoms of ergot. And so some of the, and probably Tim Evans can talk about this. Tim, butt in at any time. These are some of the symptoms that you'll see reported by the veterinarians: convulsive symptoms and gangrenous symptoms. Here's a case of ergotized feed being provided to poultry, and you can see over here on the control that these birds receive sort of a healthy diet, you might say. And over here, this would be grain mixed with a little bit of ergot. And over here, this is grain that would be highly ergotized. All right. So, of course, in cattle, we see what people will report as fescue foot. And it's interesting because this will come on their high quality pastures. This could be orchard grass. This could be the beloved ryegrass that people really want to plant. All of the cereal grains. There may not be any fescue in the field, and they'll have far worse symptoms than they would have over winter on a fescue stockpile.
Craig, I would add I would add as well that if we're seeing signs at this time of the year in the spring and entering into the summer of we've got animals with quote unquote fescue foot or quote unquote they're losing their tail switches or something like that, that's ergot. Because fescue, I mean, the one thing about fescue toxicosis is it does seem to be extremely dependent on ambient temperature, whereas because of the higher concentrations, what we see with ergot, not nearly as much, and more severe clinical signs.
Yeah. And you just don't, normally in the summer on our fescue fields, we'll see the concentrations drop low. Now, our animals, even on a fescue field, may exhibit fescue toxicosis because they consume so much ergot in the spring, and then there's this residual effect that shows up in the summer in our grazing livestock. But as you said, Tim, if we see fescue foot like this, this is ergot. I've never seen a case where it's not ergot. It's always ergot that I've seen in the summer, unless somebody's feeding highly toxic fescue seed screenings, and that has been done. Yeah. I saw someone lose 12 animals one summer by feeding ergotized seed screenings. And so, Tim, add as we go through here anything. I would point out also that many of you have switched to the Cadillac forage of novel endophytes. And those came out, as you know, about 15 years ago. More and more people planting novel endophytes and are seeing, it is a silver bullet. We rarely have such a thing as a silver bullet, but you plant novel endophytes, you're not going to have any more toxicosis at all. Reproduction, milk production, weaning weight, whatever, it's totally gone. But remember, it is a grass. Just like ryegrass and just like wheat, it is a grass. And so if it's infected with ergot, you'll think you've got the old fescue back in your field. It's just ergot populating that seed head. Want to show this in some of the University of Missouri experiments. Several years ago, we ran rat trials, and the reason that we run those is for screening. Many of our agronomists, for example, before they take a new variety to the field, they'll run a greenhouse trial, an early screening to see what happens. Then they go to the field and then to the farm. And we do the same thing with some of our varieties when we want to test for toxicosis. And this was done in Don Spire's lab over at Animal Sciences. And we were testing to see if this is an initial screening to see if these novel endophytes were toxic, and they weren't. And you can see here that this temperature, as Dr. Evans said, this temperature is ramped up to 31 centigrade, and you saw all of a sudden the body weight drop. They stopped gaining on Kentucky 31, but on the novel endophytes, of course, they're non-toxic, so they continued to gain. Those are two different cultivars. We did the same thing with two other cultivars. These were 4 novel endophytes that are now on the market. And you can see over here, all right, there's a little gap here. And George Rottinghouse, who was the chemist in the laboratory, was handling those samples, and he called and he said, you have traces of ergot, not a lot of ergot, but you have some traces, a little bit of ergot body in that seed. We would grind the seed and then feed it. And that was just enough to show this difference in the rat. And you can see also, not only does it show up in the intake, it also shows, in the gain, it also shows up in the intake. And look at this difference. So this is just a reminder that you may have planted novel endophytes. You're not going to see any more problems with fescue, but all forages that are grasses that are flowering this time of year are susceptible to infection. And once those seed heads are infected from the outside, once they're infected, we're going to see this, including novel endophytes. So novel endophytes do great things for fescue toxicosis, but they can be infected with ergot like every other grass. Well, let's get down to the bottom of this here. What are we going to do for management? And it's the case many times, we need to test. I'm not saying this because I'm at Missouri, but it is true that the University of Missouri has the premier alkaloid testing lab in the United States. There are some other good labs here. We know these folks in these other labs, but this one listed on the bottom, where this is Tim Evans, Dr. Evans, on the call with us today, running this vet med diagnostic lab with his colleagues there. That is considered the premier alkaloid testing lab in the United States. So any of these will work. I would recommend that you go with our vet med lab here and test. Now, if you're concerned, and of course, you don't have to wait that long. If you walk out in the field and you take that seed head and you pull it down and shake it, or you just see growing out of the seed head, these little rat droppings, you have a problem, a very big problem brewing, okay? So, but the first thing is to test. What do we do then? We're going to have to move the cattle. We have to get them off of that. This is I think, Tim, years ago, you called this fescue toxicosis on steroids, and it is. And there's nothing you can do really right now. Just get the cattle off of there as quickly as you can. You'll pay later if you keep them there. Secondly, we're going to have to eliminate that feed. If it's a purchase feed in particular, can't use it. There is the possibility, particularly with cattle, not with horses, but with cattle, that feed could be diluted, but it would be a very expensive dilution. Probably best not to use that feed. And this again is where the lab comes in. They can tell you. It's interesting. I was driving through mid-Missouri and some of the Ozarks this week, and saw a lot of hay down, and so we kind of say, well, they're cutting hay, they're laying it down, they're not rolling it up yet, it's not cured, and it's got all these seed heads, and well, first of all, when have we had a chance? It's been raining all spring. This is our first chance. And so some people say, well, it's so bad, the hay, should I even cut it? If you don't cut it, those seed are going to develop ergot bodies. I mean, yes, it makes bad hay. Yes, that if it's tall fescue hay, that hay will be toxic. There's no question. But remember, the toxicity of the hay is cut in half by the time that you feed it. It will still be a little toxic, but it is cut in half because those ergot alkaloids degrade over time. But but most definitely continue putting that hay up and getting that off as quickly as you can, because we're already seeing these symptoms. Let me just add this also. I've noticed this over the years. When we have springs that are cool and wet like this, what do we see in the field? White clover. We'll see so much white clover, we could have bloat problems with slobbers and horses and so on. Well, it's also an indicator species for ergot. If we see this much white clover, we will see ergot in the seed heads. And so it's not surprising that we're already getting these reports. So management tip number three, go ahead and clip and bale it and get that off of there. And then the last thing is possibly ammoniate. Now we've not run a trial ammoniating ergotized hay or ergotized seeds. We've not done that, but ammonia treatment is common in grains. It's common in, not common, but it's well known to work in grains, corn grain, for example, that's infected with fusarium and other toxins. It can almost detoxify those grains. And we know also in the case of tall fescue that if we put up toxic fescue, and we're talking toxic fescue, just our common tall fescue, Kentucky 31, which is toxic. We know that if we put it up and it's stemmy, in other words, low quality, has to be low quality, and we go ahead and let it go through a sweat, and we put those hay bales under a tarp and treat that with 3% ammonia, that it largely detoxifies it. It does all kinds of things to the digestibility as well. It makes it more, there's more energy in that. But so that's a possibility. The reason there's a question mark is we've only done this with Kentucky 31. We have not done this with ergotized hay. And I'm going to stop right there and invite Dr. Evans to make some comments if he would. Is there anything, Tim, that we left out?
Yeah, I mean, I obviously, Craig, these are all great suggestions, and I think, my thought is that if you clip the seed heads before you get the ergot infection, obviously, right. I think that's ideal. The other thing I would say, that's something that we did a couple of years ago, is we had a couple of years where you just couldn't get in the field, and it ended up, we got to the point that the seed heads and the ergot had mature ergot bodies. And when we then turned that hay, we went ahead and turned those grasses that had those mature ergot bodies, and we went ahead and converted into hay. We actually lost a lot of the mature ergot bodies just in that mechanical process of making the hay. So my thought is, clip your seed heads before you have it. But if you get to the point that you have heavily ergotized grasses, and you get at the point when those ergot bodies are about to fall out on their own, if that's when you make the hay, you're going to lose a lot of them.
Yeah, I have heard that. I haven't seen it, but I've heard it, and that typically happens with a rotary mower, not the sickle bar type. I've heard that. I would love to see somebody run that experiment. This may be the year that we can run the experiment. Many times we want to run an experiment on alleviating this ergot poisoning, but we can't ever get the ergotized hay. And this is the year if we could probably get that. So anything else that we want to say, Tim? I'm going to open it up then to questions. Patrick maybe has received some questions. Patrick?
I don't see any questions right now.
All right. Okay, then back to you, Matt.
Thank you, Dr. Roberts and Dr. Evans, for that presentation. And just maybe a point, another learning opportunity to make you aware of. There's going to be a warm season grass workshop in East Central Missouri. It's going to be held Friday, June 25, starting at 8 a.m., running to about 1. It's going to be in Davisville. And the phone number is there to register. That's the Crawford County Extension Center, 573-775-2135. You can also go on the University of Missouri Extension website and find more information there. You can also register there. I'd like to remind everybody that we are making the recordings of these town halls, and these town halls then are made available on the University of Missouri IPM YouTube channel. And I've got a image below there that shows some of those presentations that have been recorded and how they're available. And you can just go to that YouTube channel and watch those recordings if you by chance miss one of our town halls. Certainly want to encourage you to share that with people you might know who these town halls don't fit their schedule. They're very welcome to view those later at that YouTube channel. And as you can see, we've had a number of views from folks that might have missed them.
I do have a question.
Okay.
So sent to me, so what about the idea of grazing tight in the spring to keep pastures vegetated? Will that keep the ergot at bay?
Yes, it will. Actually, most of the common practices that we have for forage management, for pasture management, for hay clipping, as Tim said earlier, clip it in the boot stage, clip it in late boot if you can, as soon as you can. All of that, removing the seed head, reducing seed head production will limit ergot production. That's true.
Any other questions at this time, Patrick?
No.
We do have these town halls are held every week, and this image shows what some of our upcoming town halls will be. Next week, we'll have biological control of Sericea lespedeza with Dr. Casey Olson, who's at K-State University. He used to be at the University of Missouri. And then on the 24th of June, Tim Schnockenberg, one of our agronomy specialist colleagues, will be talking about Johnson grass, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So we encourage you to participate either in the Zoom sessions or live on the YouTube channel, or catch those after they've been recorded. Any other questions before we close there, Patrick?
Yeah, Matt, there was another question that came in. Is there evidence of ergot avoidance preferential grazing by cattle?
You know, I don't know, but I would highly suspect that occurs. And the reason is, assuming you have large enough paddocks, they will selectively graze away from toxic Kentucky 31, which is far less toxic than ergot. So I don't have examples of that, but I wouldn't be surprised. Now, one of the things we could say, let me be careful here, because that honeydew is attractive. In fact, in the insect world, there are insects that go up to other insects and nod their head and signal, and those aphids will secrete honeydew so that it can be a feed source for the nodding insects. So it does happen. I don't know in the case of ergot. I would guess this, that if they were on it for a period of time, they would get off themselves, because that's what happens with tall fescue. But I don't know, Tim, if you've seen anything.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the same thing, and I had an instance a number of years ago up north where they had a bunch of grass that was pretty heavily ergotized, and they lost two cows, but the who were primarily eating the seed heads, but the farmer made the comment, well, that most of them were eating the leaves, and other parts of the plant weren't naturally going to the seed heads, which is where the ergot bodies are. So I mean, I don't, I long a time ago, I have the opinion that I really don't trust the judgment of cattle as to what to eat and what not to eat. I would never have a cow make a life or death decision for me. So That's pretty much how I approach that. I would say that we still do our ergopeptine alkaloid analysis with HPLC. But again, if anyone has any questions, man, I'm more than happy if it's just evanst@missouri.edu. Happy to answer those questions on analyses and things like that.
Can this be present distillers grains? I'll let one of you guys handle that if you want.
I think it's present in distillers grains. Let me check. We had a list up just a little bit earlier, and I didn't go through the entire list of these.
It can be in anything other than corn. Essentially, that's what I go at. So if you've got other products, we've seen it in a lot of different byproducts from the distilling industry in the past, things like that. So if it's the right weather conditions, and again, Craig is right on the mark. It's cool, wet springs are perfect. That's when we'll see it, and particularly if we still go into the summer and we've still got adequate amount of moisture and everything. A couple of years ago, we had a cool, wet spring, but then all of a sudden it went to this really, really hot drought type condition, and we didn't see as much ergot that year. Do you remember that?
Yeah,
Craig?
I do remember. I do. Yes, we went. What did we say? We went from March to July or something.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I mean, so they depend upon the fact in their life cycle that you have that cool, wet spring, but then also that it's not overly hot, and there's still plenty of moisture for growth of the grass and things like that. So.
Yes, and so let me just comment from Eric Bailey. Dr. Bailey commented here as a beef nutritionist, not aware of reports of ergot and corn-based distiller's grain.
No.
And I hijacked your screen there. Can you all see this table 3? Can you all see that?
Yep.
Okay, I sort of, Matt, I just took the screen away. But dried distiller's grains from wheat or barley, which is not surprising.
Yeah, the ergot that we're talking about that produces the ergopeptine alkaloids, you're not going to find it in corn. You'll find it in small grains, but not corn. So
yeah.
Very good. Any other questions, Patrick?
No, I don't see.
Very much appreciate our presenters today. We appreciate everybody participating and hope that you come back and join us in future sessions. That concludes our Forage Livestock Town Hall for today, and hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.